Inspector Claire Crossan, you're currently leading a campaign, isn't it, around the National Stalking Awareness Week. Can you tell us a bit about what that campaign's about?
Hi Tim, yes I can. So this week is National Stalking Awareness Week, and the theme of this week is unmasking stalking. So we're looking at the particularly around, apart from raising general awareness of stalking offending obviously, is around the different methods that have been employed by stalkers brought about by the national lockdown because of COVID. Obviously certain avenues of offending haven't been available to stalkers because our movements have been so curtailed. So we've seen a real shift towards more virtual and digital methods of offending. The stalking hasn't stopped. The method has just changed.
And when you say stalking, obviously that has connotations of following someone down a road and sort of diving out the way when they look behind. Is that essentially what what you mean actually when you talk about stalking online in the cyber world?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think for most of us, that's what sort of leaps to mind when we hear the word stalking. It's that traditional physical following or turning up unwanted at locations, and certainly that can still be the case. It's just that there's certainly more subtle ways that people are using and exploiting that technology that we all surround ourselves with and take for granted, I think, to a point, to commit these offences. I think particularly in lockdown, we've seen the Susie Lampley Trust, who run the National Stalking Helpline, have seen that in the last 12 months, 100% of the calls that they've received about cases have had a cyber element to it. And within North Yorkshire Police, our offences with that sort of cyber-enabled element have doubled, more than doubled. So it's clear that this is becoming a more prevalent issue, brought about by lockdown, but also by the different means of pieces of technology that we use on a regular basis. Your video doorbells, your apps on your phone. We give away a lot of information via our devices that we may not be so mindful of.
And with that information, then obviously it is possible quite easily to collate quite a database of information on an individual just with the information that's out there. What effects has that actually had on victims then that you've supported and dealt with in the past?
Well, from what we see when we deal with victims, it's a really impactful crime to be a victim of. It's a really personal crime, and I think particularly with using the digital means. Traditionally, I suppose if you were being followed physically, you could close your door and maybe home felt like that safe haven. But obviously, if people are stalking you via your mobile phone or your laptop, or utilising things like the Internet of Things. So we have our fabulous piece of technology for dealing with our heating systems or our lighting. If someone is accessing that, they can be within your home, and actually that can feel like a really lonely place to be, and it can have some serious impacts on victims. Depression, anxiety. Being able to trust people, so it's a really invasive crime.
So in a way, they sort of given it the online versus physical analogy. It's like making sure you lock your doors and making sure people can't read your correspondence, or actually just walk into your house, I suppose.
Absolutely. I mean, we've put a video together that's on the North Yorkshire Police website and the Facebook page today, where myself and my colleague Detective Sergeant Gavin Mays talk about, from our cybercrime unit, talk about the ways that you can try and keep yourself safe. But I think some of the means that offenders are using wouldn't be so obvious, to all of us really. Things like spyware that can be installed on your mobile phone. It's not visible. There's no app saying spyware to show you that it's happening. So these things you need to really look for by, putting antivirus software on your phone. By being mindful about your passwords. So obviously some stalking offences come about after the breakdown of a relationship. So at points that ex-partner may have had legitimate access to your laptop or your passwords if you had shared a computer or online banking, or you didn't mind them looking on your social media or what have you. But I think, sometimes you might change the lock on your door, but do you change the password for your Ring doorbell or for your smart speaker, things like that can all be utilised to exert that controlling coercive behaviour that may have been present throughout a relationship. And we know that when those relationships break down, that's a really dangerous time where, you know, perpetrators can really try and regain that control. And how do they do that? Well, there's lots of different ways, and some of it can be, you know, through the technology that we have around us.
Do you think people are very quick to recognise that they are subject to that control or subject to being stalked? Or particularly, you know, you mentioned coming out of possibly an abusive relationship. That often leads to a level of conditioning, doesn't it, to the person that's on the receiving end of it. So do you think people are quick to identify it and then report it to North Yorkshire Police?
No, I don't think they are, actually. I think, you know, this type of offending can go on for longer than we would probably normally tolerate other types of offending. Because, as you say, it could have become sort of normalised within an abusive relationship, or it can be a series of things that in isolation aren't crimes, or, you know, if they're on their own wouldn't be that alarming. But if you put them into that wider context, it builds up a picture of this stalking behaviour, if you like. In the police, we use a mnemonic to help us with identification of stalking offences, and that's 4. So it's fixation, if it's obsessive, if it's unwanted and repeated conduct. We classify that then as stalking. You know, that's how we sort of use a bit of a guideline. But yeah, no, I think traditionally people have put up with it for a long time. You know, they might think that they won't be taken seriously, or that there's nothing that the police can do about it. But we do have legislation in our back pocket now that we can use. You know, the stalking legislation was amended in 2012 to bring in some extra offences around stalking and increase that the investigative powers that we have to allow us to bring those offenders to justice.
So, if someone did make contact with North Yorkshire Police, what would they expect to happen then if they phoned 101?
So yeah, I would say that initially, if there's no immediate threat that is occurring, then use 101 to report. Obviously, if there's anything ongoing and you're frightened for your immediate safety, then please ring 999. So what would happen is you would speak to someone in our control room, and then they would take details of what's been happening, and they ask you a series of questions to just build that picture up, because then what they would do is allocate a police officer to speak to you. So that is, you know, negotiated really to make sure that it's done in a safe location, in a mutually agreed way, and then they would come and listen to you really and try and build up what's been going on. I know some people are not quite ready to speak to the police, and I would signpost them to some. There's plenty of other agencies out there that can give you that insight and advice if you're not quite ready to make that report, because I know some people aren't. So there's the Susie Lamplugh Trust, there's a national stalking helpline. Locally, we have IDAS, who provide a fabulous service for victims. So if you're not quite ready to come to the police, then please go to them rather than just suffer in silence. But what would happen is that we would begin an investigation. So if, you know, even if you're feeling that you can't quite put your finger on what's wrong, and you've thought about the other avenues and you can't work out why this person, maybe how they've obtained this information about you, then that's part of our investigation, isn't it? We need to look into how have they obtained this information about you, and what offences are they perpetrating. So again, initially it might be a discussion for guidance, or just to put you in touch with one of our stalking support officers who are specially trained to deal with victims. So and they can give you personal safety advice and just make sure that you're safeguarded in the best way, really. And then if an investigation continues, then obviously we would keep you up to date as to what stage you're at in terms of dealing with that suspect and any subsequent court cases, or, you know, how we would gather that evidence. And
part of what's needed then is just for people to be just a little bit more aware of what's out there online. So to be a bit, you know, individuals to be proactive about information that's sort of freely available. I know this is quite a big area in itself, but where can people go to maybe do almost like a check of their own online footprint? What do they need to do?
I mean, some really useful and probably a little bit more in-depth information is given by DS Mays from our cybercrime unit on our video. So I would recommend that you have a look at that if you are in any doubt or worried that you might be being subjected to this offending. there's lots of information on the Susie Lampley Trust website if you want to contact the National Stalking Helpline. In terms of practical advice around actual spyware and things like that, there's stalkerware.com. So there's lots of websites out there that will give you really step-by-step practical means to check on your phone. And as I say, not being the most tech savvy, I couldn't talk you through it now, but there's lots of ways that they can show you. I mean, a lot of us don't even realise that our phone is giving away our GPS location now, because we have so many apps on them that they generally come with a default setting that you are showing your location. So it's just to be mindful of things like that, because that can be really interesting information to someone who wants to stalk you, and obviously it can be being put out there without your knowledge.
And just to kind of sum up the kind of awareness week, what do you hope will have happened by the end of the week?
So there's lots of different pieces of literature and guidance being put out on a variety of agencies' social media pages. I mean, we always want to just raise that general awareness for victims, but the message I really want to get across is around this different type of offending that we might not be so alive to, and that for you to come forward, if you're in any doubt, if something doesn't feel right, then please come and report it to North Yorkshire Police. We will listen to you and we will take it seriously, and we have a specially trained team to look into these types of offences. And I'll just plead them not to suffer in silence, really, because we're here to listen.
Inspector Crossan, thank you very much.